Welcome to the talk show Promising Bangladesh, sponsored by Crown Cement. And this is Sinha Ahmed Saeed anchoring this very talk show. Well, viewers, today we have two guests. One, Professor Dr. Omar Farooq, and he is a leading economist, and he taught in many universities, and now he is teaching at United International University in Bangladesh. How are you, Mr. Farooq?
I'm glad. How are you?
Fine. Other being Dr. Ashikur Rahman. He is a principal economist, PRI, one of the leading think tanks in Bangladesh. How are you, Mr. Ashikur?
I'm good. Thank you very much for inviting.
Well, Mr. Omar Farooq, we know very well that budget is coming very soon. And maybe the 6th of June this month is going to be presented at Parliament. There are serious, tremendous hotspots in the field of capital market and money market. What is your realization about the state of economy at this very moment?
Thank you, Dr. Sinha, for inviting me to this program, and my best wishes to the viewers and also the fellow discussant. Assalamu alaikum. My feeling about the economy is that often we fail to have a system thinking approach in regard to what we are experiencing. Often we focus on one component of the economy and how they are related to the other aspects of the economy and how they might impact. Often it is not coordinated very well. So when we look at the overall the context of the economy, it seems that we have a lot of achievements, but somehow how to preserve the fruits of this achievement, it is becoming less clear. And also what we are experiencing is that in some respect, some signals that are coming to the market, to the economy, to the people is quite a bit disconcerting in the sense that it is not giving a very positive vibe. I'm sure that those who are policymakers, those who are at the helm of running the economy and both domestically and internationally, this is something they should look at more seriously, because confidence of the people on the system overall is extremely important. And in this regard, I think the signal that we are getting through various release of data and various steps that are being taken, I think that some of the times ahead would be more turbulent than in the past. So in this regard, I think that particularly the experience of common people, they are experiencing the inflation that affects their market basket is extremely important, and I think government should pay particular attention in this regard, both in terms of budget as well as removing any kind of distortion in the economy that leads to this kind of inflationary pressure. Of course, inflation is a complicated subject. It has both domestic and international dimensions. There are things that we cannot control, and we have to accept that. But there are things that we can do. And in those areas where we can do would be the ultimate challenge, that are we doing what we are supposed to do? Have we identified the kind of interventions that are needed to keep the economy on track? So I am concerned about some of the signals that we are getting, that it is losing the positive vibe that so far the economy, the country, the leadership has built. I hope that this doesn't become a real risk, but the vibe is not very positive.
Thank you very much. Dr. Ashikur Rahman, you also belong to Awami League.
Yes.
As you belong to Awami League, you have your own understanding about the philosophy of Awami League, economy of the Awami League.
Yes.
And how do you explain this thing?
Thank you. I think we have to accept that over the last 15 years, the country has experienced tremendous socio-economic transformation, both in terms of poverty elevation and in terms of improving per capita income. I mean, these are statistics that we can't ignore anymore. Our exports went from some 15 billion to 55 billion, if you look at that. So there has been tremendous socio-economic improvements over the last 15 years, but it is also essential to recognize that last 2 years have been very difficult. And as we see, and I think the government recognizes it, that the overall macroeconomy is under pressure, and tensions are building under different silos. And as we have communicated very clearly from PRI, that the overall macroeconomic tension has 4 key drivers. First, as Dr. Farooq said, that inflation has been almost 9.5% for last 20 months, and that's painful for the poor people, that's painful for people with fixed income. Inflation, along with inflation, we have seen our foreign reserves going down by $20 billion over the last 20 months, if not more. And we have also seen that our entire annual development program of the budget is currently financed through borrowing. That means that the entire government revenue, the tax revenue plus non-tax revenue, is spent on the wage bill, the interest rates, and the subsidy payments. Therefore, the entire ADP, which is around 2 lakh crore taka, is financed through domestic and international borrowing. Now, you very well know that both in the international market and in the local market, the interest rates have spiked, right? So the treasury bill is now giving you more than 12%. So with that heightened interest rate, you cannot finance the total ADP through borrowing, both domestic and international. And the fourth is the perilous situation in the banking sector, and that we all know about, that the banking sector is under tremendous pressure. We haven't really seen a real comprehensive reform initiative to solve the problem. So these are the 4 major challenges that are affecting the economy. So that is the broader architecture I feel that the government must embrace for the next 1 year, if not more. And that is a recipe that has worked in Sri Lanka, that has worked in many places in the world. Is a historically tested strategy that I feel the government must boldly commit to if we want these problems to come to tolerable levels. And along with these stabilization policies, I think the Achilles heel in the economy is we must ensure good governance in the banking sector. Because if the banking sector is suffering from a large pool of toxic assets, that we can say that non-performing loan, rescheduled loan, restructured loan, the latest estimates say there are around 24% of the overall asset. So while NPL is at 10%, non-performing loan, if you add restructured loan and rescheduled loan, it's around 24-23%. Now that's a big problem if the entire asset base of the financial market, a quarter of them is not performing, right? So these are issues that needs to be handled with caution. The problem these issues make, that if you don't handle the problem of banking sector, if you don't handle the problem of low tax to GDP ratio, if you don't handle the problem of higher debt, then it will create over time intensive pressure on the government to print high powered money. And as we have seen in the last budget, that government took central bank financing to cover the deficit, right? Now the problem with central bank financing is it's very highly inflationary, that if high powered money is injected into the economy, then inflation will go to even higher levels.
Thank you. I will come to you again. Dr. Omar Farooq, what's the comment on his sayings?
The first comment that I will have is that when we talk about inflation, we usually refer to a particular figure that is released by the government, and that is of course across the whole economy. When we say about common people, their experience of inflation is not the same rate that we quote as the national inflation rate. We have to take into consideration the probably what we would call weighted impact of inflation, because inflation for somebody who is rich is not the same kind of thing where people have fixed income, particularly at low income level. What they experience as inflation is devastating. That is not whether it is 9% or 10% or 15%, it doesn't tell the story. We have to come back to the reality of the whole problem. good governance is a must. Even on economic matters, to provide the leadership, to provide the kind of policy framework that actually within the framework of foundation of good governance, a lot of things as economists we can say, we can explain, we can make policy recommendations, but if they are not translated into action that produce result, then basically we as economists are kind of handicapped. So in this regard, it is very important that apart from everything that we say, there needs to be good governments at all levels. Only that can ensure the healthy economy, the healthy condition of the overall economy going forward. Another aspect that I would also address or at least refer to, as I was mentioning, that some of the signals are not very positive. If we look at most of the countries in the world, very few governments actually borrow from the banking sector. Borrowing from the banking sector, especially in a very large scale, is not a very healthy sign. This puts a pressure on the economy and on the banking sector in particular, because from economic viewpoint, it is possible there is a crowding out effect, as we call it, that when government borrows, and if that replaces the private borrowing, which is usually meant for investment, then that can cause severe displacement or severe kind of pressure on the economy. And if this borrowing also somehow is to take care of two things. Number one is that the ever-growing debt that we might not be able to service, it not only the debt itself becomes a problem, but the banking sector becomes more vulnerable to this. And the second aspect of it, when our development is overwhelmingly based on debt, that itself is also problematic, because after some time it might not be serviceable. At what point that becomes a reality, that is an issue. If we keep these things in mind, as I was saying, that from a systems thinking perspective, that as a system we need to look at that right now or in a few years, we are going to have to face the reality, we have to pay off this loan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Umar Farooq. We are going for a short break. Viewers, we are going for a short break. Please keep watching. Viewers, we are having talks with Professor Dr. Umar Farooq and Dr. Ashiq Rahman. And they spoke on many issues, especially on the economics of Bangladesh. And this very program is going to be sponsored by Crown Cement. Well, Dr. Ashiq Rahman, recently there is a statement from the very voice of CPD, Devapriya Bhattacharya. He said, quote, "There is every possibility that budget can be made amounting to taka, US dollar 160. At the same time, Bangladesh Economic Association, President and Chairman, the then President Chairman, Dr. Barakat and Jamaluddin Ahmed, they forecast there is every possibility to go up to the level of 150 billion US dollar. Is it just a dream or reality?"
So currently our tax to GDP ratio is 8% of GDP. We have one of the lowest tax to GDP ratios in the world. And in any advanced countries or comparable countries, the tax to GDP ratio is around 15 to 20% of GDP. So that basically means that if your economy is $100, $20 gets taxed. While in Bangladesh, we are only taxing $8, right? Now that's a problem in Bangladesh. The lowest tax to GDP is constraining our capacity to give a very high or what is needed in terms of budget. So these figures, I think, are not said, I feel that they should not be said in terms of what is immediately possible. Because immediately we are only having a budget of $60 billion, right? So I don't think overnight from 60 billion in a year's time, any country has achieved 150 billion. It's simply not possible mathematically. But as a long run aspiration, say over the next 15 years, 10 years, if we increase our tax to GDP ratio by 1% every year, say from 8% of GDP to 9% next year to 10% next year and keep on growing for say 10 years, then our tax to GDP ratio will be around 16 to 17%. And if we add another 3% deficit financing, then our tax to GDP will be around 20%. So that is possible probably in 10-15 years, but not immediately. But I want to come to the major discussion here, that I agree that the average inflation estimates are done over 400 items. And that's why the inflation rate are often lower than inflation that we feel on few items, which we call core inflation, right? So BIDS did a survey, and I think BIDS found that in rural areas on core items, people are experiencing 15% inflation, which is also very high. And I feel that, as I said, that inflation, foreign reserve depletion, debt management, and banking sector, these are areas that we must show good policy commitment to. I feel that if the economic team within the government has clear clarity regarding what needs to be done, when they must do it, and how boldly must they do it, then we can effectively make a turnaround in our economy very shortly. And we must do it because, as I said, the last thing Bangladesh needs is to get stuck in middle income trap. Right, our per capita income is now $2,700, and we have come from $800 in 2008 to $2,700 in 2024. It's a remarkable journey, and Bangladesh's economic transformation under Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has been well appreciated even across the world. But we want to make structural changes. We have to make structural changes, governance changes, so that we don't fall within the middle income trap, so that is experienced by, say, Latin American countries or many countries in Africa. We must maintain the growth momentum. So I feel if the economic team understands the source of the economic problem, and I hope they do, and I'm optimistic that they do, then I feel that they will commit to the stabilization policy and then turn around the economy. Of course, that does not solve the problem. You also have to address the long run problems of creating human capital, improving the quality of education, skilling up the young people, preparing for fourth industrial revolution, keeping your country competitive in the international front. Those are long-term, medium-term problems that we must navigate. So you must identify your short-term challenges, your medium-term challenges, your long-term challenges, and take coherent strategies that goes from the short term to the medium term to the long term.
Well, thank you very much. I will come to you again. Professor Dr. Umar Farooq, we can create the problems, we can solve it. What is your understanding?
That's a very good thought, because it gives us hope and the realization that we have things to do and also to take responsibility for what we may have done. The problem is that it usually is not the same group of people. The people who create problem and people who solve the problem are not necessarily the same group. Thankfully. In reality, though, the things that are controlled in terms of the solution, unfortunately, there are reasons to be concerned about that are we really looking for solution? My humble submission as an economist is that problems are solvable, but we must have a determination that we want to solve it. We must be somehow have the courage to stand up to what is needed, and there has to be some kind of authenticity and integrity of purpose. Otherwise, many things that can be very good in paper, but it doesn't translate into reality. Going back to what Dr. Ashikur was rightly saying about the management of macroeconomy, one thing that I want to go back is that there was a time when economics was not called economics. It was called political economy.
Yes.
And when it did become simple economics, it somehow became divorced from the reality of the world. That we as an economist, somehow we created a model, a structure of our own, and gradually we became more and more entrapped into our own world, as if the reality is supposed to conform to our model rather than our model reflecting the reality? The reason I bring this up is because have we really become better in the management of macroeconomy? I think so, yes. However, if we also look at the last few decades of experience, almost every decade we are facing a kind of major recession, globally speaking. And these recessions are things that when it happens, it doesn't happen in a very predictable way. We start scratching our head after the recession occurs or crisis occurs that, it doesn't quite fit our moral or understanding. Even Ben Bernanke, who was the Fed chair at the time of the great global recession, that almost was becoming Great Depression, but no depression, it's just a great recession. He was scratching his head because the policy tools that we have, let's say contractionary monetary policy, fiscal policy, or expansionary monetary and policy and fiscal policy, we have a framework of understanding that how it should work. So at this point, my point would be that, once again, if we are really having genuine interest in solving the problems, especially, as I say, not the problems of any particular group, but overall broader population, then we need to look at some of these issues that are very important from institutional and structural viewpoint, and also take measures that remove this kind of distortion. Because when there is distortion, that as an economist, I have no way of suggesting anything to remove, only the political will and the leadership that can actually address this. I think the country is in a great position to go much further ahead, but there can also be constraining factor if we don't take the responsibility for what is happening and how it can be removed. It is not going to be solved simply by a budget if the budget does not reflect that underlying reality and the understanding of it.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rashikur Rahman, having been within the fold of Awami League, how do you analyze the state of governance in Bangladesh, especially which is tremendously and seriously burdened with corruption and non-accountability?
Look, as a political worker and as an economist, I feel that Awami League is a secular party that has always been committed to social welfare. Since its inception in 1949, it has never been a party of the elites. It has always been a party of the struggling people, and it has always tried to solve. And our prime ministers, if you see the 6 5-year plan, the 7 5-year plan, the 8 5-year plan, the Vision 2021, the Vision 2041, the focus has been helping the exploited, helping the underprivileged, making sure poverty and extreme poverty goes down, making sure basic amenities go to people. So it is a party with a center-left economic orientation. Of course, like any third world country or developing country, corruption is a problem in Bangladesh, and maybe there are areas where we have not done enough. And I want to come back to Dr. Farooq's statement. See, when the global crisis happened, I just want to use it as an example. It's not that nobody understood it. Some people did raise the red flag. There was a summit where Raghuram Rajan presented a paper where the paper said that all this financialization or financial development is creating higher risk. And that good advice was ignored by Larry Summers, was ignored by Greenspan, and they argued, no, this financial development is lowering the risk of a recession, and we are taming the business cycle, as Ben Bernanke once declared that the great beast has
just
been conquered.
suppose I'll come to you again, please.
So I'm just coming to the point. So good advice is often ignored, and that's a problem in the political economy. So when he was saying that, it's not that sometimes we don't understand the problem, but for political economy reason, it's difficult to execute the good advice because it's not being taken up. And I personally feel it will always be a challenge. No matter which party is in government, that challenge will always be there, because interest groups will always try to block good ideas, good reform that we suggest. And I think that will be an ongoing political economic challenge as Bangladesh becomes more rich, more complex, more dynamic over time, and it's something that we cannot simply ignore. But as long as we understand where the problem is coming from, as long as we can see the iceberg, we can make adjustment. The problem happens, as it happened in 2008 in United States, that they could not see the iceberg, and that is the difference between us and them at this point in time, that we know clear problems are emerging. And I feel that's not a bad sign, that's a good sign, because policymakers are not waiting for a black swan event, that they're waking up all of a sudden to a crisis. So I am optimistic, cautiously optimistic, that we will do the right, we will undertake the right measures, and we will do the correction that is necessary.
Thank you very much. Well, viewers, we're going for a short break, and please keep watching. Viewers, welcome to the talk show at the last phase, and this talk show is being sponsored by Crown Cement, and this is Sin Ahmed Saeed anchoring this very talk show. And we are having talks with two brilliant economists. One is Professor Dr. Umar Farooq, and other being Dr. Ashikur Rahman. Well, Mr. Umar Farooq, you are very smart in the sense of analyzing anything, and you know very well the good governance and corruption cannot run side by side, but it happens in Bangladesh in reality. What is your focus?
I'm currently working on a book that is basically also including one of the components that we need to address, and that includes corruption. Actually, in any economy, it is important to understand that corruption can eat the system from inside, that sometimes we don't realize until too much damage has been done. From my side, as a Bangladeshi, when I look back at the dream of Bangabandhu, the kind of society he envisioned, where it would be, where people would get their right, everybody, not just a few selected people. We need to ask ourselves that with all the achievements that we have, and we have achievements, have we fulfilled that dream of what I call shared prosperity? This idea of shared prosperity is highly important because on one hand, I am a Bangladeshi, and I would like to see that every Bangladeshi has their fair stake in the economy, and they get a fair share, not just a selected few. Unfortunately, since the time of passing away of Bangabandhu, it doesn't matter which government we talk about, they all have contributed to development in some way, but also have not taken the issue of corruption seriously. And gradually, it has become more and more complex, more and more institutionalized, and more systemic. And it is very difficult to come out of it, but I am hopeful it is possible that leadership can turn around and make a commitment that we need to somehow preserve the fruits of the development that we have achieved already, and that would require that we need to address the issue of corruption. Now, I also want to bring out, because as Dr. Ashikur said, that we live also in an environment that is largely secular, but also we are a Muslim majority country. People are generally having some kind of religious feeling, but our religious feeling is misplaced. Our religious feeling somehow does not translate into a very conscientious role against corruption. Our people, they pray, and with the other hand, they take bribe. Our people, they do a lot of things and then also add, the kind of things that make things that are kind of fraudulent. Our food, they are tampered. And you will see that our masjids are full. There is hardly any place in the masjid, this overflows. But what I'm saying is that there are two ways you can get the ethical issues addressed. One is that you build an ethical culture. There are many countries around the world where you don't need to pay anything to get a driver's license. or any other kind of license, or you go to an office, because these things are normalized. These are routine things that nobody is trying to make any money out of it. At the same time, there are also countries where there is very high level corruption, where through lobbying effort, again, the rent-seeking behavior extracts value in favor of certain sector or industry at the expense of others. But still, the dynamics of those economy is such that it does not somehow work against the people overall. And then the other side, the ethical side, that can be also that you can build that culture of ethics from religious viewpoint. And if we say that we are Muslims, but we pray, we fast, and do all that, but also it does not translate into what we have in our system. We say that our Prophet said that you take property of somebody unjustly, fraudulently, we are going to have to deliver it before God on the day of judgment. So we have very inconsistent behavior. I don't mind which way we get our ethics, but ethics is important to address our corruption. And I would still like to see that to preserve all the achievements so far, Bangabandhu's vision requires that corruption is addressed firmly and addressed decisively.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Omar Farooq. Dr. Ashikur Rahman will not wait for the days of final judgment. And that's a different world, different manner, final destiny of human beings. We have to do something during our life in the world. And from this very standpoint, what is your just profound realization about what is happening in Bangladesh at this very moment, centering corruption?
Well, I feel that corruption creates a lot of dissatisfaction within the people. And I think we haven't handled the issue with as much efficiency or as much clarity as we should have. Because corruption undermines social justice, corruption undermines economic justice, corruption undermines political justice. And corruption challenges the legitimacy of any government. And if it becomes embedded and entrenched, and it creates systemic risk, such as we are seeing in the banking sector, then it also hurts our economic aspiration. So it's a problem that we cannot ignore, and it's a problem that we should not ignore if we believe that Bangladesh needs to become a high-income country by 2041 or upper middle country by 2031. I believe that economic governance, if I even use a bigger term, I feel that yes, it is a problem and we must handle it boldly, but we must look at the broader problem of lack of economic governance or weaker economic governance, especially in South Asia. See, this is the difference between East Asia and South Asia. East Asian tigers, Hong Kong, Singapore, now China, and others, South Korea, what they focused was on economic governance, getting economic governance right, getting their private sector moving so that they can compete at the world stage. And now that is the thing that we need to replicate in South Asia. And that is a challenge for some reason, and I keep saying it, that one of the differences between state machinery in East Asia and South Asia, that East Asian machinery has been performance driven, where South Asian state machinery has been historically procedure driven, which is that we are happy to live within our procedures and not perform. And so that's why we need to have a bigger picture, a more clear vision of what is the state of economic governance in Bangladesh, if not entire South Asia, and how we can reform it so that we can replicate what East Asia has achieved after the Second World War. And that's not a big, South Korea from $500 per capita or $200 per capita has achieved $34,000 per capita. Remarkable achievement for a country, in 60 years. Now that is something that shows that major leaps are possible, provided you get economic reforms right, provided you get economic policies right, provided you commit to the right set of policies and the right set of institutions, and you show bold policy commitment and political commitment to economic governance. And I think it is something we cannot ignore if we take our vision clearly, and if we accept Bangabandhu's philosophy that we have to create a society free of exploitation, a society that there will be social justice and economic growth at the same time.
Thank you very much. Professor Omar Farooq, philosophy in theory and in practice, implementation. Do you find any gap between the two in the context of Bangladesh?
It's not just in Bangladesh. There are a lot of countries. Actually, it's not even a lot of countries. Many, many countries have this gap. So this is not something that is unique to Bangladesh. We need to recognize that. What is important is that what do we want to do with our country? That's the focus is. We can take responsibility for what others are doing. We have to take responsibility for what we are doing. So this gap that we have in terms of words and action, this is fundamentally important. And that's what, when we talk about good governance, it cannot be just in talk. It has to be in practice. This is something that those countries that have achieved, as Dr. Ashikur Rahman was referring to, East Asian countries, from the outset, when they became independent, one thing that they have addressed right from the start is the governance issue. They did not have the governance related problem that was sustained over a period of time, and then they tried to address it. So we have a different challenge. Our governance issue was never addressed in a systematic way, in a genuine way, in a practical way. Those effects have accumulated over time and has become significant, and now sometimes we feel like we are overwhelmed. But fact of the matter is that it is never too late if we want to do it. So our experience is that from many countries that have succeeded, including, as referred to, South Korea. So that's why I emphasize that the countries that have developed in such a balanced way, they have addressed the governance issue right from the early stage. That should not mean that those who have not addressed at the early stage cannot do it or should not do it. The thing is that we need to take it more as a priority, more as an urgent thing, and decisively address it, because what is going to hold us back is not the other aspects, but this corruption aspect, because I would not be surprised that we may even become a middle income country. But the issues that we are talking about, the people who are left behind, the people who are extracting values in their favor, a small group of people, we might be able to become middle income country without addressing these underlying issues. Fact of the matter is, at some point in time, people may not tolerate it anymore, and there are social upheaval, political upheaval that can occur. It doesn't have to be. I think that our leaders have a rich heritage, as again referring to the vision of Bangabandhu. We need to embrace that. We need to articulate a vision that builds on that, not away from it. And I'm confident that it can be achieved, even though we're a little bit late in this. But as I said, better late than never.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Omar Farooq. Well, Mr. Ashikur Rahman, this is a very simple asking to you. What about the leadership in Bangladesh at this very moment? Because we are in a very serious condition to move ahead. How can it be resolved?
Well, one thing I admire about our leadership at this point, or if you look at the longer history, that our Prime Minister has been an excellent manager of economic and political crisis. If you see her entire political journey, economic journey, she handled the war crimes trial very effectively. She handled the global financial crisis very effectively. She handled the COVID related consequences very effectively. So I do believe that she has a very strong, our Prime Minister has a very strong understanding of how to manage emerging crisis coming from any sources, and I think she has proven that. So I'm optimistic, but I do believe that going forward, it has to move away from crisis management to more structural reforms that needs. What is different between her leadership and others, that see, when in 2008 when Bangladesh Awami League came, she gave a vision of Digital Bangladesh 2021, and many people started laughing and mocking and whatever, and she said that I will ensure electricity in every house, I'll reduce extreme poverty, but those are reality now. even if you see the great infrastructure changes that has happened from metro rail to Podda Bridge, from nuclear power plant to Matarbari, these are real changes that she has brought. So what I like about her is that she has always taken a long run view, 2021, 2041, even Delta Plan 2100, which looks at the climate realities of Bangladesh over the next 100 years and how Bangladesh can navigate those climate realities. Now, of course, you cannot, the system that has been created to operate also needs attention. It cannot be just, we cannot just be too focused on, if we have the right leadership or the wrong leadership or what she is doing or what someone is doing. But we have to also ask about policies and systems and institutions. As things stand, I believe Bangladesh needs to focus on 3 issues going forward. I'm not talking about this budget. I said what needs to be happen in this budget. But from a very long run perspective, if we want to replicate East Asia's economic success, that we must focus on institution, we must focus on human capital, and we must focus on technology transfer. Because the 2 big challenges that Bangladesh faces are coming from 4th industrial revolution, which is going to take away our comparative advantage because cheap labor will no longer matter, and it's from climate change. And to mitigate climate change, to mitigate a 4th industrial revolution, and also to mitigate the increased economic polarization between China and US, we have to navigate these 3 realities very effectively over the next 20 years. And I feel as long as Sheikh Hasina is here, I am very optimistic, but we should never become overconfident, and we must always accept challenges, recognize challenges, and address those challenges with political commitment.
Thank you very much. Professor Umar Farooq, just 1 minute.
Well, economy is a complex subject. So let's not pretend that it's anything simple that we can address, but anything that is also a problem can be solved, and we can. I think leadership needs to recognize that the achievements that have occurred can be significantly compromised if we do not address the issues of governance and corruption. And I believe that the current leadership, the confidence and the tenacity it has, if it applies the same tenacity to corruption, it can, and I hope that it would.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Umar Farooq, and thank you very much, Dr. Ashikur Rahman. Well, viewers, we are about to end this talk show, and before ending the talk show, I have to summarize what the 2 speakers boldly uttered here. Viewers, both of them are very much patriot from their own standpoints, and they spoke very well about the economic development around the world as well as in Bangladesh. And they also meant what the development in Bangladesh concept means, and governance in the economic sector and governance in the political sector, the 2 chapters differently, but they are highly related because in fact there is no economics without politics, and that is called the political economy. Again, it is reviving again. And from this standpoint, Dr. Ashikur Rahman narrated many things, having examples from South and Southeast and South Asia. And he categorically asserted that for economic development, we need the governance in the sector. And the same thing has been echoed by Professor Dr. Umar Farooq. And he also believes that Bangladesh is in a position now. There is a tenacity, and there is a good leadership. Thing is that has to be shown in practice. And Professor Dr. Ashikur Rahman also believes Bangladesh is such a country which is destined to go such a stage. And we also believe today or tomorrow we will survive and shine like anything. And thank you very much, and we will meet you again in the next talk show.